Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on female participation in sport. I will be your host for today and my name is D'Angelina Mitseski. So I am a regional consultant at Women's Health Grampians and I also lead all the gender in sport initiatives that we do here as well. So we really appreciate that you've made yourselves available for today's webinar. I know that a lot of you might be suffering from webinar fatigue, but you're here and you made it and we really appreciate it and love you for it. So thank you very much. So since the pandemic has started, Women's Health Grampians has been bringing to you a webinar series just to highlight the impact of COVID-19 on women and girls and how they've been affected in different ways. So we've talked about the impact of family violence, we've talked about the division of labour in the home and how that's increased and that burden has fallen mainly to women. We've talked about the difficulties diverse women have had in terms of accessing services, and we've also talked about the impact of sexual and reproductive services during this time. So today we are going to focus on all things related to sport and really talk about the impact COVID-19 has had on women involved with community sport. So just before we get into the presentation, I do just want to talk about some housekeeping rules for today. So this is going to be a 30-minute webinar and it is being recorded. So if you're so enamored by this presentation, which we hope you will be, we encourage you to watch this on repeat if you like, but it will be up in the next couple of days. Also, we want this to be as participatory as possible. So as I have a conversation with the guest speakers over the next 25 minutes, we really do encourage you to ask questions of the speakers and we will hopefully get that to the end of the webinar in around 25 minutes. And just a reminder that no question is a silly question. So what you're thinking is probably what someone else is thinking, and just be a keyboard warrior and type in whatever you want to ask the speakers and we'll convey that to them at the end. Okay, I think it's really important always to do an acknowledgement of country, and I would like to pay respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting. So I am broadcasting or streaming to you from Ballarat, so I would like to acknowledge Wadawurrung people and the elders past, present, as well as emerging. But you could be watching this somewhere else in the Grampians, you could be watching this somewhere else in the state, and who knows, this could be going national, fingers crossed. So wherever you are, we just really want to acknowledge the First People nations of where you are witnessing this webinar for today. I would also like to take this moment just to acknowledge the impact that Indigenous communities have on sport. And before COVID-19 had hit, this would have been a really good opportunity for us to celebrate their culture through Indigenous round. So in the AFL, we would have had Dreamtime at the G. In the NRL, we would have had Stoneycles round, and maybe at your local community club, you would have had your own version of Indigenous round. So that is a missed opportunity. We haven't been able to challenge racism and celebrate the Indigenous culture in the way that we would normally do. And I would encourage you that when we get back to business as usual, that your local community club would plan for an Indigenous round in the future. So just to mention that during COVID-19, there has been increased rates of family violence as a result of COVID-19. I just want to really reiterate, and I think we should all be getting this message across loud and clear, that tough times out there should not excuse tough times within the household. It's really important that we set a zero tolerance attitude for family violence, and you as individuals and as workplaces have an opportunity to do that. But we also need to get across that there is support and help available for anyone who is experiencing family violence, and I would refer you to that 1-800-RESPECT number that you can call anytime to seek support. We also at Women's Health Grampians have a list of local service providers that we can provide to you if you need that type of knowledge and information. So I'm really excited to bring to this webinar today. It's all about sport, and we've been greedy and we've got 3 speakers and we're going to fit them into 25 minutes. So I'm just going to briefly give you a background on each of our speakers and then we'll get right into the webinar. So we have Emily O'Brien, who is a project coordinator at Sports Central, and she will be talking to us about the health club checks that Sports Central have been doing over the recent months. We also have Rochelle, who is a Professor of Sports Participation at Federation and Victoria Universities, and is also a Participation Ambassador for the City of Ballarat's Active and Women Girls Sports Strategy. So she'll be talking to us about the statewide research that is currently happening around COVID-19 and sport. And lastly, we also have a local up the Wimmera end, and that is Tony Baker, who is a board director of Minyat Matoa Football Netball Club, and is really going to provide us with that local community perspective on how women involved with his club have been affected by everything that has happened through COVID-19. So just as a quick introduction, I just want to make note that the sport and recreation sector has been affected just like any other industry because of COVID-19. So at a community level, in our households and in our workplaces, we have all been having these conversations about how competitions and seasons have been cancelled, how are we going to restart competitions, how concern around player welfare, concern around player salaries being cut. There has been some concern that diversity and inclusion programs will be, I guess, slashed and cut, and the funding just won't be there. And also concerned that the progress that we've made around gender equality in sport might regress because of everything that is happening due to COVID-19. So it's not within the scope of the webinar to dive deep into those topics. So instead, we are going to focus specifically on female participation rates and how they have been affected beyond the obvious reasons, and take a deeper dive into what that looks like at a community club level. So I'm going to bring Emily online to talk through some of the findings that Sports Central have uncovered in the conversations that they have been having with local sporting clubs, and we will go from there. So thank you, Emily.
And thanks, Dee. So I'll just give a bit of an overview first, and then we'll get into the key themes that were found throughout the conversation. So between April and June, Regional Sport Victoria undertook one-on-one guided conversations to develop a greater understanding of the COVID-19 impacts on sporting clubs, leagues and associations, as well as some of the issues and opportunities moving forward that were identified. So the data captured was recorded systematically across the network, and we at Sports Central undertook 64 of these conversations, which covered across 6 local government areas. So whilst it is important to note that of the questions asked, none of these were shaped around gender, many of the responses did take a gendered approach or involved female participation. So getting into the key themes, several clubs raised their fears of losing members to other sports, particularly those in the upcoming traditionally summer months, sports that may not be as affected as the winter sports have been with the virus. So questions formed around if people would return to these sports, if particularly participants, but volunteers as well, if they might have enjoyed their off season and liked staying inside in the winter months rather than being out in the freezing cold, perhaps running around on a netball court in a tiny little dress or something like that. So I know I'm personally one of those people that are reconsidering my winter antics. So perhaps these were things that were raised as potential concerns for clubs. So on the other hand, we did have clubs that have seen this as an opportunity, that they understand that there'll be an increased appetite for community sport, that the volunteers will be refreshed, and that perhaps there'll be participants that are looking for a new outlet or a social connection. So golf, tennis, cricket and netball were identified as the main competitors for sports. So in terms of resources, a number of clubs identified that they had intentions of increasing their female participants or getting new teams up and that sort of thing. But unfortunately, the funds that they were planning to put into these efforts have now had to be reallocated due to the financial instability in these uncertain times. So a lot of those efforts have been put on the back burner and unfortunately might be pushed for another season. So in terms of alternative offerings, clubs and sports have been looking to fill the gap in the female pathway, which is fantastic, and try and come up with these different offerings for new and existing participants. So social sport was one that was mentioned a lot, as well as offering midweek competitions, modified formats and that sort of thing. Creating a positive culture and sharing success stories were another thing that was really identified by a lot of the clubs, and they just often want to know what it is that other successful clubs are doing, sharing the stories, and just sort of find out what it is that they can bring into their own club, and what it is that can make them a more attractive club overall. Thanks, Dee.
Fantastic. Well, it's great that you were able to get 64 clubs involved. I know that, you know, they don't have a lot of time at the moment. So the fact you could talk to 64 clubs was really encouraging. And it's also encouraging, I think at the moment, all clubs are going through an age of austerity and thinking about their funds and what they can commit to. But it was also nice to see that some clubs are prioritising gender equality, or at least planning for it in the future. So that was fantastic. I'm going to stick with the data theme, and I'm going to move on to Rochelle, because Rochelle has been doing a lot of statewide research on COVID-19. So this is a bit of a mouthful to say, but I guess the research that Rochelle has been doing is looking at the impact COVID-19 has had on the physical, mental and social health of sports playing Australians, and comparing that pre, post and also during COVID-19. So Rochelle, my first question to you is, are you able to give us an overview of your findings so far, in particular the mental health aspect of players at the moment?
Yes, so as you said, we surveyed over 6,000 people that normally play sport but now couldn't during May and June during the harsh lockdown. And we asked them their sport and physical activity patterns during COVID and also what they would normally do pre-COVID. And we asked them their health during COVID compared to a year ago. And 25% of adults reported worse mental health during COVID compared to a year ago. 29% reported worse physical health. And 31% said, worse mental health. But also 28% reported feeling downhearted and depressed, and 30% said they'd lost sleep due to worry. So quite concerning. We haven't looked into the social connectednesses yet because we're still analysing some of those results.
Yeah, and that's concerning. When you said the 1 in 3 are losing sleep, and that's just, I mean, if that's the state that people are in, that's just really concerning, because we know that sleep is really powerful for restoring your mental health. So the fact that they're without sleep is something to be worried about. I remember reading an article from the World Health Organization who said that one of the best things that you can do for your mental health during the pandemic is to actually focus on sport. So whether that is playing sport or whether that is watching sport, but we can't play sport at the moment because there's none available. You might be able to pick up non-sport activities like running or walking or cycling, but we're all in the midst of winter, and I think most of us would prefer to hug a hot water bottle than go out and exercise. And then you might be able to watch sport, but again, that brings into the accessibility issues that a lot of people face. And I know, for example, over the next 20 days, the AFL is playing footy for the next 20 days, but more than half of those games are not on free to air. So if sport is a medium to perk up our mental health, how is that possible if not all of us can access it? So really interesting findings.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that participation in sport compared to individual types of activities can have better mental and social well-being for participants. And that's normally due to the social and club nature. You know, it's the connectedness with others. But that doesn't mean that you can't be physically active with others, you know, during these times. Doesn't mean you can't walk with friends if you're in regional Victoria at least, or walk and run with your family. So if you can do exercise with others, it often does improve your mental health and social well-being. So where possible during COVID restraints, if you can be active with others, it's more likely to benefit your health.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to stick with your research again, Rochelle, just for a moment. And I know you haven't isolated it to the Grampians region, but I was wondering if you've noticed any gender differences in the findings so far.
Yeah, we did. And I was surprised by this, that females actually reported worse physical health and worse mental health than the adult males, and not by a large degree, but by several percent. And, you know, it could be for a range of different reasons. You know, it could be related to their different, you know, work environments or family environments, you know, homeschooling, the mothers having to take on more roles in terms of working full-time from home and homeschooling. Have people lost their jobs? Are women more in health professional settings and more stress? So it'll be interesting when we dive in more deeply, because we do ask people about their occupation and their residential location and where they live, and to try and understand why we're seeing poorer health amongst those females.
Yeah, that was my initial response when I saw that finding as well, Rochelle. I was thinking, what are the reasons behind that? And I was also wondering, do you think it could be because I guess women participate in community sport more for social and fun reasons, where men tend to gravitate towards sport for reasons such as being fit, winning and being competitive. So for women, if that social connectedness is taken away from them because clubs are shut down, that therefore could contribute to poorer mental health. I mean, we don't have the scope at the moment to get into it, but I was wondering about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. We actually did in our survey ask people's motivations for participation, and for everyone, children and adults, it mainly is about the social reasons and for fun and enjoyment. I mean, that's why we play sport, because we enjoy it. And the females definitely have higher rates of, social engagement as a main priority rather than competition, which was higher for the males. So definitely if women, are away from work, being isolated, and, really missing that social chit chat that they get with other mothers or other participants. I know even too, my boys, with their football closed down, I miss, just talking to the other parents at footy and finding out what else is going on in their lives. So being connected is really important, and sport's a perfect vehicle to connect us as individuals, but also as communities as well.
Yeah. Which I think that's a great segue into Tony. So Tony, I guess at the moment we know that there's an obvious reason why there's been a drop in female participation in sport. If there's no live sport being played, obviously women aren't playing sport, but there are other ways to participate as a player. So you'd be involved in training, practice matches, workout challenges, even online social activities. So I guess at your club, we've had this conversation offline, but you have noticed that there's been a drop-off holistically within your club. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate on what some of those reasons might be.
Yeah, thanks, Dee. So many of our senior netballers work in the health industry, and there's an obvious anxiety there about playing sport and, potentially contracting the virus, and then what impact that might have on your employment, but also, what impact it has on that important role you have as a health practitioner as dealing with COVID-19. And I suppose while we have some men in the health industry as well, it's largely a female issue for our club, and I would, from talking to other clubs, it's similar with them as well. Yeah. We also have mothers that, many mothers that play netball, and normally our support network, what we call the Borough family, around to help mothers and parents look after their kids while they're training or playing. And with the restrictions at the moment, that's just not possible. So some of those mothers just aren't able to participate because for one reason or another, or their family network can't help them either. So they just find it hard to participate. Yeah. There's also just that general anxiety about the virus itself, and, that's likely to be keeping people away. I suppose the combination of all those things, can lead to a reduction in participation. I suppose the biggest concern for us and most clubs will be whether that's long term and will people return.
Yeah, and I think they're all valid reasons, and I think, healthcare workers are the reason why we're able to fight the virus. So if the majority of the females involved with your club are in that industry and are in essential services, if they become compromised, then so does our ability to fight the virus. It's not easy to backfill healthcare workers. So I understand that they have to be super vigilant about their movements, and it's a shame, but it's what has to happen. I guess the concern here, Tony, and you've just mentioned it, is that if this pandemic continues to happen and until we get a virus, this is just the way of life, it's going to be this way for a long time, there is a possibility that their absence from community sport might actually be permanent. So they might actually pick up other recreational activities such as yoga, cycling or walking, or they might pick up other codes. And Rochelle, we've had this conversation that, for example, golf, because it allows that social distancing, it actually appeals as a more safer sport. So they could enroll in other codes as this unfolds. So I guess the next question to you is, what are you doing as a club to maintain retention and engagement with your players, your female players, so that they do come back and they stay?
Yeah, so as soon as the virus hit, I suppose, and we went into lockdown, we put out a survey to our members and asked them how they wanted to be connected with the club, remain connected, and overwhelmingly they told us they wanted to continue to be connected through our Facebook page, but also our newsletter. And we were able to look at that in detail. We could decipher it based on gender as well. Yeah. So we've developed pages for each team so that those teams can communicate with each other and their coaches and keep connected that way. We also have our home Facebook page where we can talk more socially about what's going on at the club and what the board and those things are doing. And then we have a newsletter for those people that aren't on social media, have an electronic newsletter that goes out via email. We've had a lot of social activity on our Facebook page and some really fun stuff that's happened, and to keep people connected and having a bit of a laugh, but also watching people training and talking about what they're doing while they're in lockdown, and changing now as we're obviously getting out of that, hopefully. I suppose some of the things we're looking at, we keep offering options, and the key to it for us is about diversity. So, as I said before, some people are anxious about certain types of activities, but we're looking at a range of different activities to suit different people in different situations. So one, we might think about fitness activities, others might be game simulations, and others might be more social events that people are comfortable with. So it's about that diversity of options, really. So we could look at things like practice matches down the track and those kind of things if activities aren't, if we can't get going with games and those kind of things. But we plan to run another survey just to touch base with our members again and see what they want to do, what's changed and how do they want to stay connected and what services can we offer.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think as a club, you need to have a diversity of options. Why some women might like a hardcore workout challenge, it might not be for everyone. So diversifying for different personalities, I think, is the way to go. I've seen some clubs do what's called a Riddle Me This challenge, which is a fun and social activity that you can do online. And I saw one of the riddles was, the more you take, the more you leave behind. If anyone wants to know, the answer to that riddle is actually footsteps, and it took me all day to figure it out. But it's just a way to get women involved with the club and stay connected. So I think what you're doing is a great initiative. And I'm just going to get Rochelle briefly to touch on this as well, because you've got 2 boys who are involved with sport. And I was wondering, is there any other initiatives or approach that a club could take from your perspective just to engage women and retain them?
Yeah, I think staying connected, like Tony said. So my boys generally play tennis locally as well as in a national squad. So Jared normally travels to Melbourne twice a week by himself, but can't. And they play local footy. And they were really disappointed. Again, we had a club survey to say if people were willing to return to sport, and the club was all go ahead. And we got a text message on Sunday saying, yes, we've got enough COVID officers. We're going ahead, and then the league pulled it on Monday, and my boys were devastated. They were really devastated because they'd just been, shut down from school for a whole term, and that was they were really looking forward to just connecting with their mates. They didn't care again about premierships, about really the competition and the ladder, none of that. It was about connecting with their mates through sport, which they love. But one way that the club connected with them, they had weekly Zoom meetings, and even my boys we went for bike rides during lockdown. Too many hills in Lau for the old girl like me, though. And so they said, we've got to get back. We've got to have football meeting. And they were excited about once a week connecting with their mates. They could see their mates, but their coach had weekly challenges. And being adolescents, they're always on their digital things. They love recording things. They love taking movies and so forth. So they had all these challenges. One was a time trial. I had to measure out in the car 1K and do that and time it. Other one was push-up challenges and just fun stuff to stay connected, that they could then talk to each other as well and talk about how they were feeling. And that was really important because they couldn't really connect with a whole group of people in a safe forum like that because there was no school and there was no sport.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. I think you've got to provide those opportunities as a club, especially for people's mental health. So hopefully those ideas have given some ideas to other clubs on how you can engage women and girls. And I think at the end of the day, what you've done, Tony, with your club is go directly to the source, ask women through a survey, what can we do to make you feel included? What can we do to keep you connected with our club? And that will hopefully sort out or solve the issue moving down the track. So I'm going to just end with one final question to you, Tony, because I guess any initiative that a club takes at the moment to retain and be inclusive of female players at the moment is promoting gender equality. But are there any other initiatives that a local community club can do around this time to promote gender equality even more?
Yeah, absolutely. Clubs have massive social networks through our members, sponsors, supporters, our players. So we've got massive connections. Our ability to communicate en masse shouldn't be understated. So it's really easy to share information via our social networks. we're all hooked on via social media these days, so it's really easy to do that. So we'll be looking at sharing more information via social media and our newsletter around gender equity and impacts on women as a result of COVID-19.
Yep.
Lots of great information from Women's Health Grampians and Gender Equity Victoria that has been published, and really amazing information about the impacts on men and women through COVID-19 and sport.
Yeah.
You know, the other things to look at is for clubs to look at joining up alliances like the CORE, so Communities of Respect and Equality, which can really help in this area, and our club's a proud member of that, and I'd encourage other clubs to have a look at it. It's a great initiative that gives you a lot of help in terms of thinking about gender equity at a sporting level.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I didn't pay Tony to pump up CORE, but I appreciate
There's a free one.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that note or that statement you made around communications is so important. Community sport reaches the community in such a way that it's just, you know, we can't underestimate the impact that sport has on reaching people. And I think at the moment, given that there's been an increase in family violence, using your social networks to explain what is going on and what family violence looks like during COVID-19 is probably really, really important. So I'd encourage all clubs to do that, and Women's Health Grampians can support you with that type of messaging. Okay, so that sort of brought us to the end of the formalities of our conversation, but I am going to open it up to some Q&A, which some questions have come through. So I'm just going to get it up on screen. So one of the questions was, we're still doing Go Soccer Mums in Ballarat, but it's very different to the soccer mums that we're doing pre-COVID-19. Very, very individualised, but we're still able to connect by being co-located. So that's great. That's a great comment, and it's nice to see that some of those socially modified forms of sport are still happening. I've got another question, and it's really directed at you, Rochelle. So when will Rochelle's work be finalised, and how can we access that?
Yeah, good question. We're starting to analyse it now. We are juggling quite a few projects, but definitely if my email's on the webinar details, feel free to drop me a line and I can email when some of the results are done. They'll be published in industry reports, so we'll try and promote them through social media and our networks, as well as, you know, academic peer-reviewed publications. But, you know, hopefully within, you know, let's say 2 months, we'll have the pre-COVID and during COVID results, and then we'll be surveying again post-COVID. So unfortunately, that's looking like hopefully summer, but then winter next year, to hopefully see how sport can improve people's health once they can return to sport.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm sure for anyone who doesn't know, if you do want to contact the guest speakers for further information and some of the initiatives that they have talked about today, we will link you into a contact information slide just in a moment. So I'm just going to ask one final question, and I'm actually going to direct it to Emily, because I guess at the moment, Emily, we've got 3.1 million volunteers who are involved in community sport. And at the moment, they're having to plan for a lot of return to sport initiatives and abiding by the COVID-19 restrictions. So is it too much of a burden to ask clubs to plan for diversity and inclusion initiatives at a time when they're already overburdened?
I think it's really complex, because obviously, as you've mentioned, going forward from now on, the sporting landscape looks so different, and we just don't really know what it's going to look like day by day at this rate. So for the volunteers, the burden is increasing. But I think with something around gender equality and prevention of violence against women, it's something that doesn't need to be a completely complex initiative. It can start really small, and it doesn't need to be a huge burden and an added task to the task list that's ever growing. So I think even if it's something that, as we were mentioning before, Tony mentioned how easy it is to contact so many people at once through the social media and things like that. So sending out messaging and just sort of planting some seeds so that when things do get back to somewhat normal, or the new normal, there are leads there to continue on with.
Absolutely. And like, we do respect that a lot of clubs are run by volunteers, and I guess at Women's Health Grampians we do a lot of gender in sport work. So if you need help with any of the equality initiatives that you want to set up within your organisation, we can certainly support you there, and I guess do some of the heavy lifting for you while you focus on other things as well. So that sort of brings our webinar to a conclusion. I guess I really want to thank Tony, Rochelle and Emily for making themselves available for today, and hopefully you got a lot out of what they have said, and that might give you some direction on how you engage female players in your club. There is a contact information slide that we'll just put up in a moment, but if you do want to reach out to them further, please feel free to do so. And just another mention that if you are suffering or experiencing family violence, we really do encourage you to contact 1-800-RESPECT or Women's Health Champions for further information on how we can support you as well. So thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and we still have more webinars that we'll continue to bring to you live over the next couple of months, and would really appreciate you attending those as well. So thank you very much.